Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Kathryn Guiley here, and I'm here to talk about epigenetics. I'm going to share my screen, get right to it. Okay. So I'm going to title this presentation, The Most Important Ladder That You'll Ever Climb. And I think you know we're talking about epigenetics, or the double helix, as I've shown it here. Did you know that the double helix was discovered by a woman? Actually, it was a team, but Rosalind Franklin was on the team that discovered the double helix. And I'm just so proud to say that my dad, who has a PhD in biochemistry and worked in the field of genetics for many decades, he was responsible or part of the committee that changed the name of the Chicago Medical School to the Rosalind Franklin University of Health Sciences. So yay for women and men too. But I just think that's a fun little nugget. Okay. So I want to start here with a quote from the amazing Nikola Tesla. If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Now, I work a lot with frequency and vibration in my work with clients, looking at things like brain waves and doing things with energy work. But today, for this presentation, I'm going to focus primarily on energy and specifically how knowledge about our genes and epigenetics can allow us to have the most energy and realize our human potential. So, why am I so in love with energy? Well, I'm going to show you a page from one of my kids' books. This is a book called Give It a Go, Eat a Rainbow. And yes, it's all about eating a rainbow of fruits and vegetables. And it's interesting because in my work with kiddos, so I run a nonprofit, Nurture, and we go to schools and we do programs at community centers and social service agencies. And if you start to talk to kiddos about cardiovascular disease or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or anything that like is a potential out there in the future, or it's just too scientific, they kind of lose interest quickly. And I think that adults are the same. Yes, we're all a little bit more concerned about these things, but what we really want to know about is how to be more energetic, how to run faster, how to play. So that's how to get kids and their energy. And so in this book, the character who you see here, he's kind of running, he or she, by the way, Blake could either be a boy or a girl. The character's name is Blake. And Blake at the beginning of the book is sitting in front of a table full of sugary treats and donuts and processed food and candy. And Blake is looking we call him slow or her slow at that point because Blake does not have a lot of energy and kind of, little tummy ache, and all the other kids are playing and Blake's not enjoying that playtime. And so the kids want to learn how to give Blake more energy. So Blake goes on an adventure and, of course, invites the kids along through a rainbow of fruits and vegetables. And so here you see Blake, after having had all these yummy fruits and vegetables, running so fast that there are magical sparks flying off of Blake's heels. And the kids get really excited because they have helped Blake on this adventure to find how you get energy. And we're going to be learning more in this presentation about how nutritional interventions, or what you eat, can be really, really powerful for epigenetic interventions and having the most energy as adults. So yes, as kids, also as adults. So yes, we're already talking about genes. So you guys know which kind of ladder we're talking about. But I am curious how few people have had their genes looked at. And I was trying to guess, I was just giving this presentation to a live group, guess why people were not getting their genes done. It's not that expensive to get a kit. Most people have heard of 23andMe. And Ancestry.com is another big one. There's a lot of different companies that are doing these cheek swabs. So it doesn't really seem to be a thing where it's like invasive, right? Because it's just a cheek swab. So why have not that many people gotten their genes run? Well, I have heard from my clients that fear is involved. I say that fear is fantasized experiences appearing real. Well, fear really comes up when people start thinking that their genes are going to tell them something that they don't want to hear. So I don't want to know that I'm going to get breast cancer, or I don't want to know that I'm going to have cognitive decline, or I don't want to know that, ... Well, what is so wonderful about some of the new work coming out on epigenetics is actually the kits don't tell you anything that you can't control. They actually just tell you things that you can intervene on today. And we're going to be talking about all the great work that Dr. Dale Bredesen is doing to really prevent Alzheimer's, or if Alzheimer's has already started, to work on all of those things, all those factors. He calls them the 36 holes in the roof that can really prevent a decline in your cognitive performance. So that's some bright light on this topic of fear. And as Elizabeth Gilbert talks about in her wonderful book, Big Magic, we can just let maybe fear come along for the ride. Let's not let fear have their hands or his or her hands on the steering wheel. Instead, let's take control of the car, of the vehicle, and let maybe fear get in the back seat. Okay, so fear's in the back seat. Now we're going to start talking about epigenetics and how we can take control of our human potential. So one of my heroes in this area is Dr. Dawson Church, and he wrote this fabulous book called The Genie in Our Genes. Actually, The Genie in Your Genes. That's even a better title because it's about you. And there's a quote here on this slide that basically just summarizes that his teenage kid said, the idea that our genes would be this blueprint, that it would control our destiny, is so 20th century. So it's like not even like so passe. It's like not even a couple years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago. It is like of the past century to even think that we are not in control of our destiny by doing things through epigenetics. And what does epigenetics mean? I'm going to go to my queen bee slide, and then I will talk about epigenetics. So from a semantic standpoint, epigenetic means over the genes. So what it means is like there's all these different things that we can do to turn on or turn off or upregulate or downregulate our genes. And we see this in nature with bees. And so here's a picture of a queen bee and the worker and the drone. And you see the queen is way bigger and way cooler. No, I'm just kidding. They all have important roles, but you see that they actually manifest epigenetically very, very different. The interesting thing about these bees is they have the same genes. So what has happened? Well, that's epigenetics right there for you in front of your own eyes. Through her diet, so the queen bee doesn't eat a lot of what the other bees are eating, like pollen and honey. Instead, she eats royal jelly. So am I telling everybody to go out and eat royal jelly? No, not necessarily. I am saying that I believe that food is medicine, but it's just one of the many epigenetic interventions that can really dramatically change our energy levels and change how we express ourselves in the world. So when I speak of epigenetics, yes, I am talking about nutrition. I'm talking about lifestyle. I'm talking about water and air, and I'm talking about physical activity. And things that we can control through how we spend our time. But there's also another important component, and that's what's going on internally. So on this slide, I've kind of adapted what Dr. Church talks about in his book that I just referenced, The Genie in Your Genes. And this is a diagram that he has on, I think it's on page 76, at least of my copy of his book. And yes, external environmental influences play a factor in how our genes are expressed. But look at what is going on here with internal interventions and influences. So he talks about belief and biology of belief. Dr. Bruce Lipton's work, amazing stuff. Highly recommend that you read that. Beliefs are very, very important. And I'm going to go on to some of the other words on the slide here, nurturing. And that really has to do with some of the genes that have been shown to be turned up or off or on or off through how we are nurtured. So this is not a blame your parent moment, because I really believe that we can nurture ourselves through self-love practices. And we'll be talking a little bit about that in a moment. But nurturing actually does allow for genes to express themselves differently. Energy medicine, I'm a fan of that. Visualization, energy psychology, heart coherence, all the work that they're doing over at Heart Math and what Joe Dispenza is doing with brain and heart coherence. So fantastic. As you see in this diagram, huge influence on how our genes are expressed. Spirituality, there's a wonderful study, if you haven't heard about the nun study, and looking at the diaries of nuns and how they expressed gratitude and sort of their internal belief system, as well as spirituality, really plays a role in their long-term health and longevity. Meditation, attitude, prayer, and altruism. And on altruism, I'm just going to nod my hat or my head to the work of Arianna Huffington. I just love her book Thrive and how she talks about the third leg and how the third leg includes, and the third leg is all about like our power. So power, money, and then the third leg is, let's see if I can remember it all. It's wisdom, it's well-being, it's wonder, and then giving back, or altruism. And so all of those things add up to be this part of us that makes us thrive. So that's a reason why I keep up my work with my nonprofit Nurture. But you see that this has an influence there on methylation or acetylation. And those are basically, very simplistically, those of you that have PhDs in biochemistry or genetics could say this is simplified, and it is. But methylation is often turning down genes, and acetylation is turning them up. But that's an oversimplification. But really, how our genes are expressed are influenced by all of these things that are internal as well as the external. And you see this over here with the modulated gene expression, which has an effect on all of our systems, our maladaptive systems, our adaptive systems, cortisol, our HPA axis, things with our hormones, DHA levels, all that. DHA is related to aging and so many other factors, hormones. So just wanted to kind of show you that it's not just what we eat and how we're moving our bodies and the air we're breathing and the water we're drinking, but it's also these other things that are going on internally and that we have so much control over wherever you are. Now, before I go into the case studies, I do want to say that this presentation does not constitute medical advice. I do not diagnose, and I'm not treating in any way, shape, or manner for any medical conditions. So that's sort of my ethics class speaking there. And then I'm going to go right into these case studies because they're fun, because it's all about people gaining their energy back, just like Blake in that blueberry field with this magical sparks flying off of Blake's heel. So this woman was feeling kind of just depleted, not a lot of energy. And we looked at her genes and we saw that she had an MTHFR adaptation. I don't call any of this stuff, I guess people would say mutation, but it's not. It's actually a polymorphism. So we are actually looking at SNPs, which are single nucleotide polymorphisms. And there's two that have the most research on them. One is the 677, the MTHFR 677, and the other one is the 1298. And those are the RS numbers. I know I'm getting a little technical here, but basically you can look at both of those and get an idea of your methylation pathways, which are associated with detoxification, specifically phase 2. So if you have a reduced enzyme activity due to SNPs, and I will say that I have this particular SNP issue going on. You could have, as little as 25% enzyme activity or something like 48%. And you might need to look at or want to look at your blood work to see where your folate levels are, B12, where your B6, and where your homocysteine levels are, to see how those methylation pathways are playing out in your health. Maybe there's no effect at all due to epigenetics, or maybe you need some more support through methyl donors. And so you might be thinking, oh, do I have to take supplements? No, actually, I'm part of the Chris Kresser ADAPT practitioners program, and he's got some great information about methylation supporting foods. And so they're great ones. You see under, vegetables and fruits, there's beets and radishes and shiitake mushrooms, like yum yum. And there's proteins and nuts and seeds and spices and herbs and things that you can really add to your diet and have fun with in your diet that really supports those pathways and that enzyme activity. or just give you that methylation support that you need so that you can have optimized energy. And this is actually what happened with the client. There are other practitioners that will put you on methyl donor supplementation. So that's another path. But I would not recommend doing that without having the support of somebody that's specialized in this area. You can be over methylated and under methylated. So methylation, just like everything else we're discussing today, is quite complex. I'm just trying to make it very, very simple and showing you that having this information can lead to some fantastic changes that can give you more energy in your life. So the next Queen Bee story or case study is a person who is part of the paleo community, pretty well known, and was doing all those great things like, putting butter in the coffee, right, and doing some of the like intermittent fasting, lots of coconut oil, and thinking that was the best thing for her cognitive health. And so what she was worried about, though, is this the right thing for my genes? And when you're talking about a lot of saturated fat, which is what butter and coconut oil is, then you want to be looking at your Apoe status. And this, I mentioned the work of Dr. Dale Bredesen earlier in the conversation. And his work is fantastic. The End of Alzheimer's is a fantastic book. And what he recommends is that people know their Apoe status. And if you have 4 in that status, so if you're a 3-4 or a 4-4, that you watch your saturated fat intake because you do have a higher likelihood unless you start today to modify that. And so I'm just going to quickly talk about some of the nutritional modifications. So, coconut oil in that case, not your best friend, and the butter, but instead, some of these more Mediterranean fats. And so the good news for this particular person is that she happened to love the Mediterranean fats, and she simply modified her paleo diet to be more Mediterranean paleo, which, by the way, is yummy, and then she has optimized fats and more energy. So happy face over there. And then my third and last case study for today is somebody that could not sleep. And so that's why I have the picture of this dog with like the really wide eyes, a little bit of anxiety here as well. And just kind of felt kind of jacked up at the end of the day, and not in a good way. And so we looked at her SNPs, and we found that on her GAD genes, which are responsible for the conversion of glutamate to GABA, there were some modifications there. And GABA is this wonderful transmitter for your brain, a neurotransmitter that makes you feel peace and calm, tranquility, and it helps you to sleep. And if you have some modifications in your GAD genes, then that glutamate, if you're eating grains, which are high in glutamic acid, there's dairy, soy, and of course things like MSG. So if you have these modifications in your genes and you go to a Chinese food restaurant and they happen to have a lot of the MSG in their food, like make sure you would ask, right? Because otherwise you could go back to your hotel or whatever if you're on the road or if you're at home and you're finding that you're wide awake after having that MSG. It might have to do with the conversion of the glutamic acid to GABA. So good to know, because then with these epigenetic interventions, again, I'm focusing more on nutrition today. I also am a certified nutritional counselor, but taking out the MSG and then the grains, especially at the end of the day, like no grains, within, hours of going to sleep, because you want to have enough GABA in your brain that you're calm and relaxed. You don't want to have that GAD modification blocking that pathway. And here we have the picture of the sleepy little dog in the bed, which is what we want. We want to have a good night's sleep so that we can wake up in the morning refreshed. And by the way, I want to thank at this point in the presentation, Ariana Huffington, again, for bringing so much awareness around the importance of sleep. I am a huge fan of sleep and making the time for it. So doing an analysis of our SNPs is about valuable and actionable advice. I think a lot of times people have thought that some of the information they've gotten back has been like a little gimmicky, like, oh, insects like to bite me or whatever. And actually, that was on my report. And it's like, I knew that. Instead, this is about getting information that you can take action on to feel better, to have more energy, and achieve peak performance. So that's why I love this. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking about it if it was gimmicky. And some of the things that are really fun to look at with one of these gene reports is you can look at how your mitochondria are functioning, and if you need mitochondrial support, which by the way is very easy with diet interventions, with physical activity or movement strategies, as well as there's some supplements for that as well. I'll tell my anti-aging story. So I had, and this is thanks again to Chris Kresser and his work. When I did the ADAPT program, we spent a lot of time on a condition called iron overload. I think that anemia or iron deficiency gets way more attention in our medical world, when the reality is that iron overload is a very serious consideration, and there is a genetic origin to it. And so there are 3 SNPs, the HFE SNPs, that he recommends looking at. I did have one that was modified. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that I have hemochromatosis, which is a condition where if you have significant modifications in those SNPs, that you would really need to look at it. But it does mean that I need to watch my blood work and make sure that my iron markers are good and that I'm not getting iron overload. And if you think about iron, iron is oxidative, right? It makes things rusty, right? And what do we worry about when we age? We worry about oxidation, and we worry about like getting rusty and old, right? So with iron overload, that can be something that plays a factor. And again, I'm simplifying it here and trying to have a little bit of fun. But this is a serious thing. The great news is that the intervention for somebody that has iron overload to a certain extent, and I'll speak for myself here. So my iron markers on my blood work were high. I did see that I had a modification, and so I started giving blood as frequently as I could. And then what I saw is that my iron markers normalized and my metabolic markers improved as well, because there's a huge correlation, or there's an important correlation between those iron markers and metabolic markers like fasting glucose. And so I saw that my fasting glucose went down, to it was a little bit high actually, which is incredible because I thought I was such a great eater. But anyway, so that's an example of a wonderful modification that I made based on knowing this information. And by the way, every time I go and donate blood, I am told that I save 3 lives. So it's like helpful to myself, but it's helpful to the world. So that's why I do this kind of stuff. It's like so amazing. It's so in service. I think we know now that optimal nutrition and supplementation can come from looking at your genes. Another really important area is seeing how sensitive you might be to mold or to Lyme disease, being bitten by a vector or tick is the most common one. But when it comes to mold, it's really interesting. You might have seen the documentary Moldy. You might have heard about going to a house and it's a couple and one person gets totally sick because there's mold in the air and very musty, and it's just they're breathing in and they get very, very sick. And the other person, the partner, experiences no symptoms whatsoever. And it's because our genes actually, our SNPs in particular, related to handling mold can vary from person to person. So it's good to know if you're one of those people that's sensitive to mold so that you can get some services to find out if you're exposed to mold and do something about it, because you absolutely can. There's also fun party tricks. Like there's some genius genes. There's some, I've heard it called Edison genes, but there's a particular SNP, DEC2, that if you have a modification in it, you don't really need to sleep that much. Don't think that you have it. You have to sleep. But there are some people that if they get 4 hours of sleep and they have the SNP, they feel like $1 million. And clock genes, kind of telling you whether you're an early bird or a late bird or whatever. And I can tell you that's helped me with my parenting. Okay, so then I'm going to go into the dashboard that I use through Apeiron. And this just kind of shows you how beautiful it's presented, so that you have a card for each one of your areas that you're looking at. And behind the card, it kind of shows you the SNPs that are looked at, and it shows you your results. And then there's even some instructional videos about each of these areas. So that's my fun demonstration of the interface that I use. And as we get to the end of this presentation, I want to underline the fact that we are 99.9% the same. So this is not about, being different from each other or trying to even differentiate too much. It's about embracing our superpowers. It's about getting to know ourselves better. It's about embracing the queen bee in all of us. And I really feel that connection is key. And it's interesting is I'll go back to the previous slide with the interface. Apiron does not do direct to consumer reporting because they believe that that connection is key in terms of having these results explained to you in a supportive manner as opposed to just getting something and then having to read through it yourself. So I'm a big believer in a collaborative health model where you have physicians, you have complementary practitioners, going back to one of those previous slides, the energy medicine and the energy psychology, but also health coaches that can allow you to implement behavior change and actually stick with those programs so that you feel your best. That's the conclusion. And thank you so much for your attention and for caring so much about being your optimal you.